If you're a longtime Geek's Guide to the Galaxy listener, please rate and review us using your favorite podcast app. And I want to give a special thank you to Eric M. Targaryen, who just gave us this great review on Apple Podcasts. It says, "Not too long ago, I just finished re-listening to the podcast, and I see why I love this podcast. David is truly an amazing writer and speaker, and quite humorous. He balances all of the speakers in a great way where everyone is heard. Truly keep up the amazing work." So big thanks again to Eric M. Targaryen for that great review. Alright, so now let's get to our show. Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 584 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is J.T. Petty, writer and director of horror films such as The Burrowers, Mimic 3, and Hellbenders. He's also been a writer on video games such as Splinter Cell, Minecraft Story Mode, and Outlast. And in this interview, we'll be speaking with him about his short stories, which have appeared in magazines such as Cemetery Dance, Lightspeed, and Tor.com, and about his role as executive producer on the new Amazon series Secret Level, a collection of animated shorts set in the worlds of popular video games. And now here's our interview with J.T. Petty. All right, so we're here with J.T. Petty. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, just tell us about how you got started writing and publishing short fiction.
Short fiction came probably in the middle of my career, I guess. I'd already started working in games and movies by that point. But I just always, I think being a prose writer is probably what I started off wanting to be when I was, 5 or 6 or whatever. But yeah, and I think the very first short piece of fiction I published would have been something in Cemetery Dance. I had a horror story called Grapefruit Spoons, I think. And this would have been back in the early 2000s, I guess.
So were you writing a lot of short stories through college? Did you have a bunch of unpublished short stories or was that one of the ones you wrote?
I mean, I was always writing short fiction. I mean, as a kid and a teenager, and then through college, I went to film school, so I was being trained in writing screenplays and that sort of thing. I think I'd always just write prose for fun. I remember in college I wrote a couple of kids' books for fun because I always just was such a big fan of Roald Dahl. And I think I actually got my first professional writing job, which would have been in 1999 at Ubisoft, with submissions of short stories. I'd written a couple short sort of science fiction short stories, and I gave those to the producers. And that interested them enough to give me a shot at the job.
Do you remember what those were about, or kind of were they in the vein of any particular authors or anything that you were influenced by?
I'm sure they were imitative of again, like Roald Dahl. I was probably trying to be Borges at the time, just a very, pretentious 19-year-old writer. I think one of them, one of them was like a ripoff of like a Rudy Rucker kind of a thing of how a life form would develop from yeast into something that could traverse the stars.
I think like a biopunk kind of thing.
Yeah, like a very, again, like pretentious 19-year-old, just very, very moist sci-fi. And there was one about a potato that could see that I think I wrote to try to impress a girl or something, but always got a laugh out of people because potatoes have eyes. It was kind of a Shaggy Dog joke. But yeah, I always had ambitions of being some sort of a storyteller. And I don't know, like writing short fiction is such a pleasure. I still do it for fun, and it's definitely the line between prose and everything else I do is that like prose always feels like it's for me.
So when you sold that first short story to Cemetery Dance, was that exciting, or was that just sort of like a sideline to your film and video game writing that you were already doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, Cemetery Dance was huge. I mean, I always loved that magazine. I mean, like I was such a horror nerd growing up. You know, like the first time I got mentioned in Fangoria, and the like being published in Cemetery Dance, like any of that was just incredible.
So what is Grapefruit Spoons about?
Um, Grapefruit Spoons is God. It's a story about this. You know how like when you're a teenager and like you're the kid who gets invited to something for the first time and like you don't fit in with the group and you desperately want to fit in. And I felt like a lot of my teenage years, I felt like everybody else understood something I didn't. And definitely there's a point where I was like 14 and I realized like half the kids in this class are like having sex and taking drugs all the time. And it was just, it was like a revelation to me, right? It was like They Live or something, where I was just like, oh, okay, there's, and that's that teenage thing of you know, some kids grow up faster than other kids, which is all a long preamble to say that Grapefruit Spoons is a kid that gets invited to a cooler group to be part of like the gag, you know, where you like cut a hole in a table and you put your head through it and then you make the head look like it's a fake head with the candy bowl in front of it. And then when somebody takes candy, the head screams and you scare the kid. So they talk this kind of nerdy kid into being the kid who's got his head in the table. And then once they've got him in there, they lock him down and saw the top of his head off and eat his brain with grapefruit spoons.
There's a note online that says that the story is being worked into a Faces of Death remake. I don't know if that's true or not.
That was true 15 years ago.
Okay.
So I got hired to do a remake of Faces of Death, and my approach to it was a little bit anthology in the way of the original one. And I always loved Grapefruit Spoons, and I thought it would be a cool addition. And it was like kind of a callback to them eating the monkey brain in the original Faces of Death. So, but yeah, alas, that script and that project are long dead.
Well, that's appropriate for something called Cemetery Dance. So,
yeah, exactly.
When you had another story in Cemetery Dance too, called it's pronounced Sandman for listeners. It's spelled S&MAN.
Yes.
So tell us about that story.
Yeah. So that story I actually did adapt into a movie. And that story came about because, so in my last film at film school was a super cheap horror film, but it was a feature and it played Sundance and it did pretty well in festivals. And so I started going to a lot more horror conventions, you know, like the Fangoria conventions and HorrorCon and all that sort of stuff. And because I had made a super cheap horror film that had some success, there's a lot of people making homemade horror films who would give them to me. And I was always just like, so, I guess just like provoked by them or compelled or something like you remember, you know, do you know the experience like the first time you're watching like an Asian horror film in the late 90s and you're just like, oh, the protections and the safety I feel from an American film are not here. Like getting somebody's homemade horror film is that, but multiplied by, 10 or 20, because they could do anything. And I would have these experiences where I would like be watching a fairly poorly produced and unintentionally funny film. And then it would get into like a fist fight and they'd actually have a fist fight, or somebody would cut their own arm. And clearly they were just cutting their own arm, and it was terrible, but also like crazy compelling, and felt like, am I going to get tricked into seeing a snuff film inside of somebody's homemade trauma movie? And so, and I found that super scary. So that's what Sandman is about, right? Like it's about, sort of found footage that crosses the line into real.
I don't know if you ever saw, there's this documentary called American Movie about these guys trying to make their first horror movie. Uh-huh. And there's a scene in it where the script calls for a character to have his head sort of smashed through a cabinet door. Uh-huh. And they can't figure out how to make it work. And so they're just slamming this guy's head into the cabinet over and like take after take after take. And American Movie is so goddamn charming. Those guys were at Sundance the same year I was. And
And we were the three guys who were like going to parties just to fill our pockets with food because Park City is so goddamn expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah. And so then sort of what was the relationship between the short story that appeared in Cemetery Dance and then your Sandman movie that you made?
Yeah. So I used that short story basically as part of a pitch, and went to some producers who put together enough money that we could do, what essentially became a documentary. And what I wanted to do was explore the sort of underground horror scene, as I was like trying to figure it out and meet more of those people. And then at the same time, fictionalize the story of the character who I had laid out inside of Sandman. But the way that we fictionalized him was essentially, I got a friend of mine, a guy named Eric Marsizak, who's, at the time, I think I met him because we were both just PAing on movies, but he's now writing video games. But so Eric and I basically figured out who the Eric character would be, the fictional Eric character who makes the Sandman films. And they're these like homemade horror movies that then appear to become snuff films. But, and then we just went out and shot all of those movies and then put those movies together, burned DVDs, and then started going to conventions and selling them and handing them out so that he would do that. And then after we had him established, then I started going to those conventions and filming him and pretending like I had just met him and then interviewing him at the same time that I was going to other underground filmmakers who I had in reality just met. So there's like Beelzebub, who's still making great and crazy movies. It's just like the titles of, do you know Beelzebub at all? I'm surprised.
I'm not. No, I listened to some interviews with you, so I kind of know the general idea, but I haven't. Okay. I'm not familiar. I haven't had the pleasure.
He's kind of incredible, but I mean, just like the titles of his films, are just like Ant Farm Dickhole or whatever. Like they're just it's like a boggle game of obscenity. Or there's the August Underground filmmakers, and those guys are just like artists, just like making what appear to be snuff films out of, they're in Pittsburgh still, I believe, Toe Tag Films. But essentially, so I was just interviewing real underground filmmakers and then incorporating this fictionalized underground filmmaker with a narrative I could more shape. And then we talked to Carol Clover, who did Men, Women, and Chainsaws, if you know that book, which is just incredible. And we talked to some forensic sexologists who like talk to people who are voyeurs and fraudists and people who are spying on other people. But it's all sort of came together into this idea of just trying to examine why we like horror movies and who we identify with in a horror movie, and sort of because every horror filmmaker I know is like the sweetest, most sensitive person possible, and are often like too. Like Wes Craven was famously too freaked out to watch the ear scene in Reservoir Dogs. And I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, I heard years ago that horror writers are always the most cheerful people and comedians are always the most depressed people. And sort of the opposite of what you would think. And that's definitely been true in my, my firsthand experience.
No, 100%. It's like we're doing our therapy on screen. We don't have to get it out there.
And do I understand correctly? So the premise of what was it? Ant Farm Dickhole is like ants that live in your dick and come out and kill people, or it was something like that.
Yes, yeah. I think a colony of killer ants infests this guy's dick, and then if he sleeps with anybody, the ants eat them out from the inside in a bad way.
Yeah, is that could you like watch that, or is that like distributed?
Yeah, it's available. It's everything's seeable now. It's 2024. You can. I remember like that was the other thing that Sandman was kind of about, is that like it was the last years of trading VHS tapes. Like it was so hard to see Faces of Death when I was a kid. Like I had a copy of Tetsuo the Iron Man And I had a friend who knew somebody in Baltimore with Faces of Death. We did like a trade on the corner, like a drug deal. You know, it's just like,
yeah.
And I kind of miss that preciousness.
Yeah. Okay. So more recently, you've had short stories in Lightspeed and Tor.com. Mm-hmm. And one I wanted to ask you about is Family Teeth Part 5, which was in Lightspeed. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that one came about, and it's weird that it's Part 5. We had so I'm married to Sarah Langan, who's a author. You know, she writes horror and thrillers, and is probably a lot more successful than I am. But she, I guess she introduced me probably to John Joseph Adams, who I feel like we wrote those with an eye towards a collection. I honestly, like, this is 15 years ago, but essentially we had the idea of and sort of worked out the story of an alternative take to werewolves. And I was trying to think of like specifically American werewolves, and I was really fascinated by coyotes at the time. And I liked the idea of like a werewolf where the person essentially turns into a pack instead of a single critter. And I wrote that because if I remember correctly, we basically worked out the story for like this whole kind of arc that would be connected short stories. And she wrote one and I wrote one, sort of both in the middle of this arc. And then that's as far as we go because we got distracted and did other things.
Yeah, I had to email John to confirm that there were no, like, I couldn't find parts 1 through 4. So I just emailed John, like, I just want to confirm this isn't just me, right? They don't exist.
Yep, it's just a story that doesn't make sense. I don't know why we did it that way.
Well, so I guess I'll mention too that I used to live in New York, so I met Sarah Langan a couple of times.
Oh, cool.
And
yeah, she said, did you go to Cornell?
To Colby College.
To Colby, yeah. I think you both went to Colby, yeah.
Yeah, I remember talking to her about that. I think I think she graduated in the spring and I arrived in the fall, so we just kind of missed overlapping. But I remember talking to her about Colby a couple times when I met her. But yeah, so I wanted to ask you about, so in this interview about the story, you said, the culture of coyotes feels a lot more interesting to me than dog-level violence or the mechanics of transformation, especially in the way romance in America can blur the borders that insulate a subculture, like the first time Sarah came to one of my Protestant family's witch burnings. So,
okay. I'm so glad that ended in a joke. Jesus, that was pretentious.
Well, I mean, like, obviously it's a joke, but I was wondering if that's, is that expressing any, like, actual, like, was there some sort of culture, meeting?
Yeah, totally.
Sarah meeting your family and stuff like that.
Sarah comes from Long Island Catholics, and I'm from Southern Protestants, which are both just like very, very, very dug in cultures. And I think Sarah and I are both weird enough and agnostic enough to not really be part of either of those cultures very deeply, but you also can't really help where you're from. But yeah, so there's all sorts of weirdness, and I think that's a pretty universal experience, right? Like it's a cliche meeting your spouse's family. Yeah,
I mean, like my wife's family is at the complete polar opposite extreme of the political spectrum from my family, so it's definitely been an interesting experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and sort of the Catholics and Protestants specifically inside of Ireland have been, in living memory at violent odds.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. But I mean, so you say that you're kind of agnostic, but you do write about religion a lot, it seems like, in these short stories. I mean, there's the one you had on Tor.com is called Angel Season. Mm-hmm. You have a chapbook called Children of Angels. So it does seem like it's something. There's one of the other Lightspeed stories is called Sully the God. I mean, it does seem like religion is something that kind of interests you.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated by religion. And definitely like, I mean, it's been part of my family. I, despite being Protestant, went to Catholic school for a little while. And you can't escape it. And, I'd say in America, but I think just in like humanity, like we are a superstitious species. And it feels like it's too effective a storytelling device not to use. And everybody's Bible is so goddamn strange. and such like violent, sexy, interesting stories. And I love that it's like we always associate religion with the kind of buttoned down, more well-behaved part of society. But all of the beliefs behind religion are so irrational and just filled with sex and death and all the things that make horror and science fiction interesting. So it feels like one of those things where it's worth peeling back on.
Do you remember where you got the idea for angel season? Because this is kind of like, it's like duck season, right? Where the father and son go out hunting angels.
Yeah. The notion of angel season is that like the way that people put moose antlers on their walls. There's a market for putting angel wings on their walls. And I think that image was probably what started it. And it's sort of an obvious point, right? But like anything, like the notion that anybody ever saw an elephant and was like, oh, I should murder that and turn its foot into an umbrella stand. Just like breaks my heart and makes me hate people. And like, it feels like the world is, and even humanity, right? Like we keep coming up with all this like amazing shit, and there's all of this precious beauty, and we're like, oh, I should kill that, and then I should own that.
The chapbook Children of Angels has a blurb. It says, "Sexy, funny, violent, and darkly satirical, Children of Angels is a world's best dad mug filled with gasoline."
Mm-hmm.
So did you come up with that, or like that? That's an interesting description of a story.
I think the publishers came up with that blurb. I mean, I think they're trying to say like, oh, it's kind of like Fight Club, buy it. But yeah, and there's no actual angels in that one. That one was sort of just more about sexual politics, I guess. It just, again, it feels like America specifically is so hung up on the notion of like, as soon as somebody is saying save the children as a justification for their political beliefs, you're in trouble. It's like, yeah, of course, like everybody agrees with the notion save the children. But like you could use a baby to justify anything.
Is there not like an extraterrestrial plague or something? I was just reading through all the synopses.
Yeah. Children of Angels. Basically, it's like there's a sort of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers style, like the Kaufman film where just shit falls out of space. So like this pink dust falls out of the sky into certain areas of Earth, and and everybody like freaks out and they don't know what it is, and it seems to have no chemical effect. And then in the months afterwards, it's revealed that the men, and just the men who were exposed to it, are suddenly just like these, just like energetic, testosterone-filled dynamos. And they all just start becoming successful and fit and sexy. And like they call the event Angel Fall. So everybody's just suddenly like, oh, the Angel Fall men are the luckiest men in the world. And they all start to just thrive, and they all, start pumping out kids. And then around like the 18-month mark, the kids just start dying catastrophically, like bleeding out and sort of dying as if from like those ants that get the fungus in them that makes them climb and die.
Yeah.
And it's revealed that the only way to save the lives of these children is that they have to get a intravenous feed from the fathers like every week. And so as long as they get this feed from their fathers, they'll be alive and they'll be fine. But it involves these virile men submitting to this humiliating spinal tap once a week. And so it's sort of like it then becomes the test of like, oh yeah, like are you going to be a good dad? And and it's a gag about bodily autonomy, and sort of all the politics of that.
Yeah, well, that sounds pretty wild. I was also going to mention, so this Lightspeed story, Sully the God, you wrote it with Philip Gillette. Uh-huh. And I just looked him up that he did The Spine of Night and The Europa Report. Yeah. I was like, wow.
Yes.
Those are great.
Yeah, Phil's amazing. Phil's great. I mean, so I first met Phil when I was working on Sandman. He helped out with that movie, so that's 20 years ago now, maybe more. And then I ran into him again because he did the first 3 seasons of Love, Death, and Robots basically on his own. I think he wrote just about all those episodes. And so then when I was doing Secret Level, he came in and worked with us on that. And it was just, I've known Phil for 20 years now. And he's just like such a delightful, smart guy. And like his movies are fucking awesome. So yeah, any chance I get. So we basically wrote Sully the God because we had so much fun on the episode that we collaborated on Secret Level that we were just shooting the shit and like trying to come up with something else to do, and had the notion of like, what if a Jeff Bezos type character invented magic today, and like what would that look like, and how would, as soon as if you had magic and you had a monopoly on magic and you were trying to figure out how to squeeze as much money out of that as possible, how wrong could that go? And so we did that, and that was fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess we should get into the Secret Level show. So it's produced by Blur Studio. So I was just curious, how did you come to work with Blur in the first place?
I got to Blur through Tim Miller, who owns it, who's one of our great filmmakers right now, and has been through Blur doing probably the best animation in Hollywood for a couple decades. And I think I just met him because, he's always looking for screenwriters for projects. He's always developing stuff. I did a couple, dream projects with him that got canceled, but were amazing. And then he called me for Secret Level because I've been working in video games since, 99. And he just had the notion of essentially doing Love, Death, and Robots, but as adaptations of games. So yeah, he called me up and brought me on.
And so one of the things that really interested me about Secret Level is that you brought on a bunch of authors, like prose fiction authors, to kind of submit ideas. Mm-hmm. You have people like Brooke Bolander, Rich Larson, Peter Watts, and Tamsin Muir. What was that process like of selecting those authors? So the process for Secret Level basically came out of the way that they did Love, Death, and Robots, because all of LDR are adaptations of existing science fiction short stories, or I'd say maybe probably 90% of them are, and then some of them are original gags. But yeah, I think again, Tim Miller is like such a huge reader. Like he's probably read more science fiction than anybody else I know, and has a pretty spookily encyclopedic recall of things that he's read. But so he wanted to sort of ape that process for Secret Level. So, and the other thing that kind of got us is it kept us from the temptation to just directly adapt what's in the game and to try to come up with an original story inside the universe of the game. And so, you pitched on a couple of the stories, and the process was essentially, we'd reach out to a handful of authors, we'd give them a packet that would sort of fill them in on every, the history of the game and what the universe of it was, and where the game's going in the near future. And then we just get a bunch of ideas, it'd usually be a couple paragraphs or a page, and it was all those great people you're talking about, right? Like it's insane to me that like you can call up, John Skip or Peter Watts and like be like, hey, do you have any ideas for Armored Core? And like they're like, oh yeah, mechs, awesome. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of a dream, right? Like to be able to just to talk to these people I've been reading for years. I watched an interview where they asked Tim Miller how many authors there were, and he said he thought about 50. That's a lot of authors?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Right, because we I think there's 15 episodes out there, right? And like it would often take a couple rounds of pitches to get to the idea. And there's just like there's an amazing number of amazing science fiction writers out there. And especially like short story writers. I mean, you hooked us up with a bunch of them, and John Joseph Adams was like an amazing resource for that. But yeah, and I was also just amazed at how willing to play authors are, just like that, like happy to throw out some ideas, because it was all pretty short, right?
Yeah. So I guess I'll explain. So yeah, I pitched on 2 episodes. One of them ended up not happening, and then I pitched on the Pac-Man episode. And so the directions were like, here's all of these characters from the whole like decades long history of Bandai. Try to get them, as many of them in as you can. We'd like a complete beginning, middle, and end, and it needs to be 5 minutes long. So yeah. That's a bit of an interesting challenge for that assignment.
Yeah. No, I mean, like the whole project was such an interesting challenge, right? I mean, like Pac-Man specifically has 50 years of history now and almost no narrative, but everybody has ideas about what Pac-Man is or what Pac-Man means. And like, and there's like the Saturday morning cartoon, which was like awesome, but probably not what we want to do. And so like having a giant playing field and a very narrow channel of heightened expectation, it's a challenge. And the beginning, middle, and end thing, right? Like that's huge. And we had to make episodes, that are interesting to watch if you've got no idea who Pac-Man is. And it's such a temptation just to be like, oh, here's a cutscene, here's an introduction to what this world is. Because the other thing is you do like a game system does take a fair amount of explanation. So no, I don't think we knocked it out of the park every time. I think we've got some great episodes, but it was like such a fascinating challenge, I guess.
Well, and this Pac-Man episode, it's sort of inspired by this new game, Shadow Labyrinth, that they just released the trailer for a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what did you think when you first got the packet about Shadow Labyrinth? You're like, this is a very original take on Pac-Man.
I mean, Pac-Man was one of the first things that Tim told me about when he told me about the show. Right. So like when he was laying it out and trying to make it sound interesting, he's like, oh, and there's a new Pac-Man game, and Pac-Man is now a mobile attack platform. And it's like, I think it's fine. I think it's cool. I mean, it's funny to me that people think of Pac-Man as, and I guess it's the picture on the side of the cabinet was like that guy with big cartoon eyes or whatever. But like the experience of what it's actually showing inside of the game, if they had drawn a knight and a scary ghost on the side of the arcade cabinet, you'd have a totally different experience of what that game was, even if it was the exact same graphics in game, because it's just the simplest possible shapes, right? Like it's like bleeps on a radar screen. So inside the actual world of Pac-Man, there's like very little information, even though all the sort of archetypes and iconography of it are just like so dark and compelling. But yeah, the first time, I mean, when I saw the new version of Pac-Man that they're making, like I was like, awesome. Like, because it just also looks like a very, I think I haven't actually played any of the betas on that, but like it just looks like a very difficult side scroller, which is a kind of game I love.
Yeah, there's this character with a sword. You go around, killing ghosts with a sword, and the Pac-Man character is like this robot that floats above your shoulder and turns into this giant black.
Of the other Namco stuff like Xevious and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was funny because when I submitted my pitch, I was like, I did it as sort of like a little bit of a horror kind of thing, and I was like, they're not going to go for this. This is probably too dark. And then I was watching a interview with Dave Wilson, and he's like, yeah, none of the pitches we got were as like dark and fucked up as we wanted. So we had to just kind of like do it ourselves. And I was like, wow, that really says a lot about how, just how dark, like Bloor wanted to go with these, with some of these properties, and which I think is really cool. I like the dark stuff.
Yeah, I like the dark stuff. I like the funny stuff as well. I mean, some like New World is probably one of my favorite episodes because it is just like so human. and funny. But yeah, it's like a different approach to every game. I definitely don't want to all do them grim dark, but I find so much of the stuff about Pac-Man. I mean, like being stuck in a maze and chased by ghosts. It was like I had nightmares when I was a kid all the time about exactly that of like being stuck in a labyrinth and chased by ghosts. It was like always much scarier than Pac-Man.
That was like after playing Pac-Man, or that was just a dream you had independent of Pac-Man?
No, just a random dream.
Wow. I mean, just the line in the show about, like, you can eat them, but never their eyes. There's just something like so like unsettling about that.
Yeah, but that's just straight up from the game.
Yeah.
Even the notion that like the eyes run back to that sort of, I don't know if it's a graveyard or like a ghost containment field, whatever's in the middle of Pac-Man. And the notion that like their eyes have to escape back to that and then they're born again. Yeah, it's weird. It's poetic.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some of these other episodes. So one of my other favorite episodes was Armored Core, which is based on a short story by Peter Watts, who, if people don't know, is just an amazing author. I've interviewed him on this podcast. We reviewed his classic novel Blindside a couple months ago.
Yeah,
but just kind of
incredible.
Yeah. So just what was it like working with Peter Watts on this episode?
Peter was incredible. That was another one. I mean, I think I'm still slightly nervous every time I email him. Just, it's like emailing Bill Gibson or whatever. It's just like, oh, I don't want to come across stupid to Peter Watts. But he's been totally lovely. And he emailed the day after the show came out to talk about how much he enjoyed the episode, which was a huge relief. Because I'm also like trying to be sensitive to what like adaptation can be tough, right? Stephen King famously hates Kubrick's Shining. And it's, and you can't save everything from the story and you just have to make it a different medium. But yeah, Peter, I was definitely anxious to see what his take on Armored Core was, because it does intersect a lot with a lot of the stuff that he writes about, especially in Armored Core 6 and where everything's gone, and Armored Core's take on capitalism seems to very much line up with Peter's worldview. And he sent a pitch that basically read like a story, right? Like it was one of the longer pitches we had ever gotten, and was just like, there's a decent amount of dialogue in Peter's initial pitch that survived all the way to the final episode. And I think that's the only case where that's happened.
Yeah, it was interesting because I'm not really familiar with the Armored Core franchise at all, but watching the episode, I was like, wow, this definitely feels like a Peter Watts story. I don't know how much of that, is just like you said, sort of synchronicity between his sensibility and the property, and how much was him, but it definitely had his sort of like flavor to it.
Totally. Well, I feel like it's like central to Peter's fiction that like the more damaged you are, the more specifically skilled you are. And that always felt like what the core of our story was about, right? It was just like this pilot whose damage made him special, and how passionately he would protect that.
Yeah, if people don't know Peter Watts, if you go to his website, he has a big blurb at the top from James Nichol. It says, "Whenever I find my will to live becoming too strong, I read Peter Watts."
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's not allowed in the States anymore. Have you heard those stories?
Yeah, I talked to. If people want to go listen to my interview with him, we got the whole saga. Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
That's actually one of our most popular interviews. I mean, it's I talked to him for like an hour and 45 minutes or something, and
oh, cool.
He's like, oh, you're gonna have to cut this way down. And I was like, no, this is all really good. I'm just gonna post this whole thing. This is great.
Oh, cool. I'm gonna seek that out.
Yeah. No, it's like such a wide ranging conversation from him getting arrested to, like growing up with this sort of religious background and all this stuff and philosophy and neuroscience. And I just really love him.
Oh, that sounds incredible.
Yeah. And the episode was super cool. I mean, so you said it was kind of a challenge adapting is there anything more to say about what that process was like of taking a sort of prose piece and adapting it into this very, very short visual presentation?
I mean, that one was, I would say Armored Core was one of our smoothest exercises of the process we used, right? Very often a short story would come in and there would be like 3 elements in it that are great, or like one character arc that's great. And then we'd have to break the story around that. But like, I would say, so Peter's story and then Siobhan Carroll's story, both of those just went directly from short story to script. But yeah, I mean, so Peter's, a lot of the stuff that got lost from the short story was actually stuff that was more tied into the mythology of the game. And there's a lot of elements in Armored Core. There's a whole system of coral, which is this resource that is also an intelligence, that is also possibly a drug, that allows the pilots to fly. And so that we would often be asking authors to explain all of this lore related to the game, that then once you're getting into the script, it's like, maybe this doesn't actually matter. Right. And it's just like the people who love the game could get this, but the people who love the game already know about that stuff. And it was always about boiling it down to just tell the story that we're telling, because there's no way we can encompass all of the lore of a, 18-hour experience into this 10-minute short. And there was Peter's very good in the short story about getting across the character of the pilot in how he engages in combat. And like some of that gets lost just in like the translation to your stunt team comes in and the animators and all this stuff. And it's like, everybody's got their cool thing they're trying to do. And I do think that the combat in the actual short is great. But I really liked, I remember even in the pitch reading Peter's description of like what combat would be like. And there's so many details. It's like the first thing that you see inside when the pilot gets into the core, they put thicker fluid to replace his blood into his body so that he can resist more G forces. And like all of those kind of very juicy biological details were there from Peter's story. So all that stuff is great. But yeah, the only big thing I changed on the Armored Core one is the ending, with the whole sort of God and Adam touching fingers gag, which I just liked as a beat. And then I also liked as Dave Wilson, the director on this one, was when he got to that beat, he was like, oh yeah, this is exactly how you like every creative person in Hollywood, right? Like you spend your whole life trying to be a director, and it's extremely lonely because like, you feel like you're only doing well if you're special and you're different from everybody else, but you're also lonely and you want to find other people like yourself. But if you ever actually did find them, you'd destroy them because they're competition.
I loved that final image. That was a killer. No pun intended. That was so that was so great.
Yeah, I love how juicy they made it.
Yeah, and then also the other one I want to make sure we get to is the Warhammer 40,000 episode.
Sure.
That you were like, I guess you did the script with Justin Rhodes, and then Dave Wilson was the director. Yeah. But I was blown away by that episode. That came out so good.
Oh, cool. Are you a Warhammer guy?
No, I don't have enough money to play Warhammer. Are you kidding? I can't possibly afford to play Warhammer. But I've always loved the, just like if I was in the bookstore looking at the Space Marine art and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, the whole legacy of it and the amount of Warhammer history and everything they've done. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that would be one of the big challenges of doing a Warhammer short like this, is that there's just so much lore, and you have to like decide what to focus on and how much you can squeeze in. Is that kind of how it felt to you, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And for all these projects, we had the game developers working with us, right? So there was people at Games Workshop we could reach out to and just be like, okay, so So tell us more about what a prosecutor is and whatever. Because like I love Warhammer, but I certainly don't know nearly as much about it as a lot of people out there. So it was huge, and Dave, the director, is a big Warhammer guy. Like we were talking about religion before, like it Warhammer has developed so much of like 12th century style religious thought, and like debates inside the Warhammer universe of and it all coming down to very obviously, ideas about violence and duty and faith. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was just like about trying to get like as visceral a visual story with some kind of humanity into it. Because again, like we just have these walking tanks, and like trying to figure out like what you can sympathize with inside of that. And the part of the story that I really keyed in for me was just like the whole process by which they make the Space Marines, and like identifying a child and putting them through all of this torment to turn what's a human into more of a machine. So yeah.
Is this scenario that we see in the show where there's the Space Marines kind of battle through waves of fighters, and they're kind of dragging this, which like sarcophagus or something behind them, and then they face off against this sort of like priest who's sort of telepathic and goes inside their souls or something? Is that like a story from some existing Warhammer source book or something, or was that kind of like a new?
No, it's an original story. Justin had the original broad stroke story, and then me and Dave developed it. And that sorcerer at the end, she's part of Tzeentch, which is the sort of like bird-headed god that you can see. And the statue is a Tzeentch statue, I believe. So it was all based in specific notions of mythology, but it's an original story.
No, that's super cool. So how about the idea of there's some sort of priest that they cast a protection spell over them or something who's inside the box?
Yeah, do you remember? That's a character. That's a character class from inside the Warhammer universe.
Okay. Yeah, no, I just all that stuff I thought was so cool. And so details like there's these monsters with glowing blue blood, and then they kill them, and then they're kind of like walking into the dark, leaving behind glowing footprints. Was that from the script, or is that something that the animators kind of
that was from the script. That was from the script. And I saw I remember looking at the like the first draft of that, and like the alien's blood and the blaster fire were exactly the blue and orange keyed to Amazon, like for their corporate art. And I was like, this is going to be the first thing in the trailer.
Yeah, that's cool. So was everything everything kind of come out as it was written in the script, or were there any sort of like flourishes that got added during the animation process?
Tons of flourishes and tons of. I mean, this is the first time I've been involved in, like, I've written a lot of cinematics inside of games, but this is the first time I've been involved in like a full animation process like this. And it was just constant revision as we would go. So, it's like they would, we would do storyboards and animatic reels and rough versions and refinement, and it's like just going over the same ground over and over again as it gets more and more finished. And as that's happening, Dave, the director, would have like an idea, or he'd be like, "Oh, I've got this problem." Like for the thing you were just talking about, it's like we don't have a light source. And I think I pitched him on the idea of the glowing blood, and then he was like, "Oh, and then they get spattered in blood, and so they become revealed in the darkness by the glowing blood." And then I go back and I do a little revision in the script, even though at that point it's just basically for bookkeeping. But that allows, the budget to get updated and all that sort of stuff. So it was super collaborative, super iterative, and different between every script, right? Like the Pac-Man script that went to the animators. They did their first pass, and we were kind of like, "This looks dope, like great," And they changed a couple things, but they stayed pretty true to it. So yeah, it's sort of piece by piece, but yeah, it's not, it's not Alan Moore writing a comic script at all, right? Like I definitely want him to stick to the script, but if somebody comes up with something cooler that I can take credit for, great.
Yeah, and I've just seen a lot of feedback online of people loving the Warhammer episode and saying, "Oh, they should do a whole like a feature or some longer thing just like this."
Yeah, no, that's a huge relief because like the Warhammer audience is like so big and passionate. If they didn't like it, it would have been a disaster.
Do you think there's any possibility of a longer, animation done in that same style?
I don't know about possibility. I definitely would love that. But yeah, I don't know. Anything's possible.
Well, I did see they were saying Amazon said that this was the the most watched animated debut or something that they've ever had, and then it's already been renewed for a second season. I think that was announced just a day or so, just yesterday or something.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think my sister texted saying that about the most watched thing. I hadn't clicked the link yet, but that's awesome.
Yeah. So, do you have any idea what's going to happen with season 2, or is that just still way off in the distance?
No, we're in the trenches on season 2. So we barely had time to appreciate the release. Like we just we're working on it now.
Okay. Yeah. Well, definitely looking forward to that. Because some of these things like the Warhammer one, the Dungeons and Dragons one, the Sifu one. I mean, there's still a lot of really cool episodes in this season. So yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with for season 2.
Yeah.
We're basically out of time, so we should start wrapping this up. I guess I forgot to ask. I was going to ask you earlier when we were talking about Sarah Langan. It looks like she has a new book out that's kind of a science fiction dystopian kind of book. I was just wondering if that's something.
Which one?
It was called A Better World. I don't know, just from
yeah, Better World came out last year. It's awesome.
And you think that would appeal to Geek's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yeah, totally. No, it's sort of a slightly more science fiction-y take on folk horror. Like if you, I'm trying to think of like if there was some sort of what's the Monsanto? If like Monsanto had a company town that turns out to be the Wicker Man, like that's. I feel like that's it's So it's not spaceship science fiction, but it's good.
Yeah, no, that sounds super cool. And then I guess also I saw that you're working on. Okay, so I guess I'll explain. So you have been a writer on this series of horror games called Outlast, which I guess I haven't played them, but I gather it's sort of like Resident Evil if you had no gun and just had to run away the entire time. Is that
yeah, it's a purely masochistic experience. It's like Resident Evil if it fucked you up for life.
But apparently there's a movie, like you're working on a movie version of that.
Yeah. So I've Outlast has been a indie game. We've done 2 games, a DLC, and now the Outlast Trials is live, which is a multiplayer game. But yeah, I've been writing that from the beginning, and now have a movie in the works at Lionsgate. So it's all coming together. It's a fun one because it's Outlast has always been a pretty small and scrappy team. So I've been able to sort of keep my hand on the story the whole time. And we're as the games range pretty widely in topic, but are all tied together. So we're trying to do that more with the movie.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I'm kind of in awe of how much writing in so many different areas you do. I mean, you have a whole series of children's books we didn't even have time to get into. It's just like you're a very versatile writer we've got on the show today here.
Oh, thank you. I feel prolific, and then like all these authors that were going out through, like Adrian Tchaikovsky or whatever. It's just like, oh yeah, you're going to do 2 500-page books a year. There's a lot of prolific people out there.
Yeah. But so we're all out of time. I that's all my notes, I think, for what you've got going on. Is there anything else in the works that you want to mention, or any other final thoughts or anything?
No, I don't think so. I think, no. I have to go back to work. I do appreciate you talking.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking time to talk to me, given all the exciting things you've got going on. And so we'll wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with JT Petty, and again, he's the executive producer on the new Amazon series Secret Level. So JT, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, David.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to JT Petty for joining us on the show. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.